The day I learned my wife was sleeping with Morrison from Patterson Construction, I signed the biggest contract of my career. 40 years of building an empire, and it took just 3 minutes of security footage to show me what kind of foundation my marriage was built on. Funny how life works. You spend decades checking every steel beam, every concrete pour, but sometimes you miss the cracks forming right under your nose. My name is Victor Blackwood, and at 62, I've built Blackwood Construction from the ground up. Started with a used pickup truck and a borrowed toolbox in Detroit. Now I'm sitting in a corner office on the 48th floor of my own building in downtown Chicago. The view stretches all the way to Lake Michigan, a constant reminder of how far I've come from the factory worker's son who once couldn't afford lunch. Neilchin, my IT director, stood in front of my desk, shifting his weight between his feet. The kid, though at 35, he's hardly a kid, had been with me for 10 years. Never seen him this uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwood, I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't certain. He adjusted his hoodie, a constant source of amusement among our suit-wearing executives. The security logs from the Palmer House Hotel showed up in my regular network scan. Mrs. Blackwood's key card. Well? Show me, I said, turning to the monitor on my desk. The timestamp read 2:15 p.m., Tuesday. Catherine walked through the lobby, her blonde hair perfectly styled as always, briefcase in hand like she was heading to any other business meeting. Curtis Morrison followed 3 minutes later, taking a different entrance. Amateur hour. I leaned back in my chair, leather creaking under the shift and weight. My father's voice echoed in my head. Show them nothing, son. The moment they see you bleed, they go for the kill. The old man knew what he was talking about. Sir. Neil was still there, probably expecting some kind of explosion. Would you like me to delete these logs? No. I turned to the wall of windows, watching a crane swing between buildings 3 blocks over. One of mine. I want you to keep monitoring. Every entry, every exit. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, phone records. Don't let them know we're looking. Yes, sir. Neil headed for the door, then paused. Mr. Blackwood? I'm sorry. Don't be. You did your job. I picked up my phone as the door closed behind him. Jack? I need a favor. Start keeping tabs on my wife's movements. Yes, all of them. And Jack? Make sure she sees you occasionally. I want her to know someone's watching. I hung up and pulled out the contract I just signed, a $300 million deal to rebuild half of Milwaukee's waterfront. Catherine had been pushing for this partnership with Patterson Construction for months. Now I knew why. My wife might be sleeping with Curtis Morrison, but she'd forgotten the first rule of construction. Always check what's buried before you start building. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Blackwood? The board is ready for your presentation. On my way. I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in the window. Not a hair out of place, not a sign of what I just learned. Time to go tell the board how we were going to reshape the Milwaukee skyline. And after that? Well, Catherine wasn't the only one who knew how to make plans. Jack Sullivan's taxi pulled up outside Blackwood Tower at exactly 6:30 p.m. I'd known Jack since before he got fired from the Tribune. Good reporter, better observer, terrible at office politics. Now he watched the city through his rearview mirror, collecting stories he couldn't publish anymore. Your wife had lunch at Gibson's today, Jack said as I slid into the back seat. Table for 2, but she sat alone for 20 minutes before Morrison showed up. They're getting sloppy. He navigated through evening traffic, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Want to know what they ordered? I want to know what they talked about. Morrison sweating some deal with the Milwaukee City Council. Kept showing her papers, pointing at things. She did that thing she does, you know, where she touches someone's arm while she's making a point. Jack turned onto Michigan Avenue. Been seeing the same routine twice a week for the past month. I watched the city lights reflect off the windshield. Catherine used to do that arm touch with me, back when I was building my first office complex. Thought it was genuine back then. You've got photos? On your secure server. That IT guy of yours, Neil? He set it up. Kid knows his stuff. Jack pulled over at my usual spot, 2 blocks from home. There's something else. Morrison's been meeting with Roberts from First National. Same bank that handles your construction bonds. That got my attention. When? Yesterday. Private room at the Capitol Grill. Roberts brought his whole team. Jack twisted in his seat. Look, Vic, I may just be a washed-up reporter driving a cab, but this smells like more than just an affair. They're planning something. I know. I handed him an envelope. Keep watching. And Jack? Make sure Catherine spots you at least twice this week. I want her nervous. The walk home gave me time to think. Our brownstone stood dark except for the kitchen lights. Catherine's evening routine, preparing dinner she'd pretend she cooked herself. Maria, our housekeeper, always left by 5. Another of Catherine's ideas, ensuring privacy. I opened the door to the smell of reheated Italian. Catherine stood at the kitchen island, phone in hand, scrolling. She'd changed from her business suit to casual wear that probably cost more than my first truck. "You're late," she said, not looking up. "The Parsons meeting run long?" "Board presentation. Milwaukee waterfront project?" I loosened my tie, watching her face. Curtis Morrison's team might be involved. Her finger paused mid-scroll, just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, I thought Patterson Construction was our competition." Perfect control in her voice, but her knuckles whitened around the phone. "Things change. Speaking of change, I'm meeting Thomas for breakfast tomorrow." That got her attention. "Your son? I thought he wasn't speaking to you." "He called. Wants to discuss coming back to the company." I hung my jacket, noting how she shifted topics away from Morrison. Might be good to have family back in the business. Someone who cares about the Blackwood legacy. Catherine poured 2 glasses of wine, the expensive stuff she'd started buying last year. Legacy is about more than blood, Victor. Sometimes fresh perspectives try to tear down what took decades to build. I took the wine, but didn't drink. "Remember what I told you when we got married? About how my father built his first house?" "Of course. He checked every nail himself." "No." I set the glass down. "He checked every worker himself. Said materials don't betray you. People do." I headed upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen. "Don't wait up. I've got some foundation plans to review." In my office, I opened my laptop and clicked the folder Neil had sent. 47 photos of my wife with Curtis Morrison. Emails about the Milwaukee project. Bank records. All the evidence of a foundation cracking under pressure. Catherine thought she was building something new. She didn't realize she was standing on a demolition site. Neil Chen's office looked like a college kid's dorm room had collided with NASA mission control. 3 monitors displayed scrolling data while empty energy drink cans formed a pyramid on his desk. It was 7 a.m., but from his hoodie's wrinkles, I bet he'd been here all night. "Mr. Blackwood, you need to see this." Neil pulled up an email chain on his center screen. "Mrs. Blackwood's been using a private email account. Took some doing, but I cracked it last night. She's been forwarding internal documents to Morrison for months. Bid numbers, material costs, supplier contracts, everything about the Milwaukee project." I leaned closer, scanning the emails. "Can you trace where else these documents went?" "Already did." He pulled up a diagram. They bounced through 4 servers before landing at First National Bank. But here's the real kicker. Another click revealed a draft merger agreement. Patterson Construction isn't looking to partner with us. They're positioning for a hostile takeover. They're using our Milwaukee bid to prove to the bank that we're overextended. The pieces clicked into place. Catherine had access to all our financials. She'd pushed to modernize our accounting system last year. "Show me the bank's risk assessment." Neil typed rapidly. "According to this, if we commit to the Milwaukee project at our bid price, and steel prices rise even 10%. He trailed off, letting me see the numbers myself. "We'd be vulnerable." I straightened up. "Does Morrison know you've got access to these emails?" "No way. I used a backdoor I built into our system when we upgraded the servers." Mrs. Blackwood insisted on handling that project herself, remember? Neil's fingers drummed nervously on his desk. "Sir, there's something else." I found searches on her laptop about offshore accounts. Caribbean banks. I checked my watch. My breakfast with Thomas starts in an hour. I need copies of everything encrypted. And Neil. I waited until he looked up. "Start gathering employee loyalty records. Anyone Catherine hired in the last 2 years. I want their complete background checks." "Already on it." "And sir," he hesitated, "I found some searches about your first wife, Thomas's mother." That stopped me at the door. "What kind of searches?" "Medical records. Old newspaper articles about the car accident. Mrs. Blackwood seems very interested in how you handled the estate settlement." I thought about Catherine's recent questions about updating our will, about her casual suggestions that I should consider retirement. "Neil, I'm doubling your security clearance. I want eyes on every digital communication in this building. If anyone so much as orders a coffee online, I want to know about it." The drive to Gibson's gave me time to think. Thomas was waiting outside, looking more like his mother every year. Same stubborn jaw, same way of standing like he was bracing for a fight. 5 years since he'd walked out. refusing to be another brick in my wall, as he'd put it. Now here he was, early for once. Dad, he didn't offer to shake hands. You look tired. New project. I followed him inside to a corner booth. Still taking your coffee black? Some things don't change. He waited until the waiter left. Catherine called me last night. Said you were acting strange. Wanted to know if I knew anything about it. I studied my son's face. What did you tell her? That we haven't spoken in 5 years. Then I called you. He leaned forward. Dad, I've been working at city planning. I've seen the Milwaukee project proposals. All of them, including the ones Patterson Construction didn't want anyone to see. Now we were getting somewhere. Tell me about Curtis Morrison's numbers. They're too good. No contractor can deliver that project at their bid price unless. He paused as the waiter brought our coffee. Unless they're planning to use substandard materials, or they know something we don't. Thomas nodded. 3 suppliers have quietly filed for bankruptcy protection. Steel prices are about to skyrocket. Anyone committed to major projects at current prices would be forced to sell. I took a sip of coffee. Want to come back to work, son? I might need someone I can trust running a materials audit. You mean someone Catherine didn't hire? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Maybe it's time I added a few bricks to that wall of yours. Back at Blackwood Tower, Thomas settled into my private conference room like he'd never left. 5 years melted away as he spread out the city planning documents across the mahogany table. Morrison's been greasing palms at the zoning commission. Got 3 variances pushed through in record time. But look at these soil surveys. I studied the reports while Jack Sullivan's latest text lit up my phone. Catherine had just entered the Palmer house. Again, they're hiding contamination levels, I said, noting the conveniently missing data. Environmental cleanup alone would eat their entire contingency budget. Exactly. Thomas pulled up another document. And guess who owns the cleanup company they've already contracted? Shell Corporation, leading right back to Patterson Construction. They're planning to lowball the cleanup, cover it up, and leave us holding the bag when the EPA inevitably steps in. The door opened, and Neil slipped in, laptop under his arm. Mr. Blackwood, it's happening. First National just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Patterson Construction is making their move. I checked my watch. 2:45 p.m. Catherine would be wrapping up her meeting soon. Neil, show Thomas what you found in those emails. Jack's watching the Palmer house exit. The moment Catherine leaves, I want to know which direction she heads. My phone buzzed again. A text from Robert Chun, my old friend at the Federal Banking Commission. Just reviewed First National's exposure reports. Call me. I stepped out to make the call. 10 minutes later, I had what I needed. Stepping back into the conference room, I found Thomas and Neil huddled over laptop screens, building our defense. My son looked up. Dad, you need to see these transfer records. Catherine's been moving money offshore for weeks. Small amounts, staying under reporting limits. Let her. I laid out Robert Chen's information. First National's been operating under a regulatory warning for 6 months. They're in no position to back a hostile takeover. Morrison's playing them just like he's playing Catherine. Neil frowned at his screen. Sir, Mrs. Blackwood just texted Morrison. They're meeting at the Capitol Grill at 7. She's nervous about something. Wants to review their strategy. Perfect. I picked up my phone. Time to accelerate their timeline. Neil, leak those contamination reports to the Tribune's business desk. Thomas, call your contacts at City Planning. Tell them to start asking questions about those variances. Let's see how Morrison handles a little pressure. Thomas was already dialing. What about Catherine? She'll do exactly what people like her always do when things get tight. Try to save herself. I straightened my tie. I'm having dinner at the Capitol Grill tonight. Table with a good view of the bar. Jack Sullivan will be there too, in his taxi uniform, working a shift he doesn't usually take. And Neil. I turned to my IT director. Make sure the restaurant's security cameras are working perfectly. We might need the footage for tomorrow's board meeting. Dad, Thomas called as I reached the door. I found something else in Catherine's searches. She was looking up Mom's accident. The real reports, not just the newspaper stories. I paused. What did she find? Nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Mom's accident was exactly what you said. Black ice, bad curve, tragic accident. Catherine was looking for something else. Something she could use. The anger I'd been controlling finally showed its edge. She won't find anything. Your mother died because of a real accident. Catherine's about to die professionally because of her own choices. I checked my phone one last time. I'm going home to change for dinner. Tomorrow morning, the board meets at 9. By noon, everyone in Chicago business circles will know exactly who Catherine Blackwood really is. And Morrison? Morrison. I allowed myself a small smile. He's about to learn why my father always said never try to tear down a building until you know what's holding up the walls. I headed for the elevator, leaving my son and Neil to their work. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with another update from Jack. Catherine had left the Palmer house, heading east. Running to warn Morrison, no doubt. Perfect. Let them spend their last free evening plotting together. Tomorrow, they'd learn the difference between building an empire and trying to steal one. The Blackwood Tower boardroom gleamed like a polished sword. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a pristine view of Chicago's skyline. My skyline, built one project at a time. Catherine sat 3 chairs down from me, perfect posture, expensive pen poised over her notepad. If she was nervous about last night's dinner surveillance, her French manicure didn't tremble to show it. Curtis Morrison arrived 5 minutes early, Patterson Construction's legal team trailing behind him like ducklings. Young, ambitious, $1,000 suit that screamed more money than sense. He nodded to Catherine with just the right amount of professional courtesy. Had to admire the performance. Before we begin, Morrison started as the last board member settled in. I want to thank everyone for accommodating this emergency session. We at Patterson Construction believe this merger represents an unprecedented opportunity. Merger? I interrupted, keeping my voice casual. Is that what we're calling corporate espionage these days? I nodded to Thomas, standing by the door. He dimmed the lights and started the projector. Catherine's private email filled the screen. Morrison's face went from confident to concrete-colored in about 3 seconds. Now, I continued, we could waste time going through every leaked document, every rigged environmental report, every offshore transfer. But let's cut to the foundation, shall we? I pressed the intercom. Send them in. The boardroom doors opened. 3 EPA investigators entered, followed by 2 FBI agents and Robert Shin from the Banking Commission. Catherine's pen clattered to the table. Mr. Morrison, the lead FBI agent, stepped forward. We have some questions about those zoning variances and certain irregular payments to city officials. Morrison's lawyer jumped up. My client has no comment at this. Sit down, I cut in. You'll want to save your energy for the criminal defense team you'll be hiring this afternoon. I turned to the board. Ladies and gentlemen, in your folders you'll find documented evidence of Patterson Construction's attempt to force a takeover through fraudulent environmental reports, price manipulation, and corporate espionage. You'll also find proof that First National Bank's involvement violates 3 separate banking regulations. Robert Shin nodded grimly. The Banking Commission is suspending First National's ability to finance any new construction projects pending our investigation. Catherine stood up so quickly her chair rolled back. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly. Sit down, Mrs. Blackwood, Thomas said from the doorway. We haven't gotten to your part yet. He clicked to the next slide. Security footage from the Palmer house played silently on the screen, followed by banking records of her offshore accounts. The next slide shows Mrs. Blackwood accessing confidential files at 2 a.m. last Tuesday, Neil added from his corner, followed by those same files appearing in Mr. Morrison's email 3 hours later. Morrison's lawyer was now frantically whispering in his ear. The FBI agents had moved to block the doorway. Catherine's face had gone from professionally composed to storm cloud gray. You son of a bitch, she hissed at me. You set this up. Watch me, followed me up. Like you watch my first wife's accident reports? Looking for something to use? I kept my voice level. Here's what's going to happen. Morrison, you and your firm will withdraw all bids on the Milwaukee project. Catherine, you'll resign from the board, effective immediately. Your prenuptial agreement has a morality clause. My lawyers will be in touch about the divorce terms. You can't prove Morrison started. The EPA has already issued emergency orders to stop work on your last 3 projects pending environmental review. The EPA lead investigator cut in. We'll be investigating every project you've completed in the last 5 years. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Board's adjourned. FBI agents will need statements from everyone. Mr. Morrison, I believe they'd like to speak with you first. I turned to Catherine, seeing her for the last time. The house keys are on my lawyer's desk. Don't bother packing anything you didn't bring into the marriage. I've already documented all the household assets. As federal agents led Morrison away and board members huddled with their phones, I caught Thomas's eye across the room. He gave me a short nod, the nod his mother used to give when something was done right. Out in the hallway, Jack Sullivan waited by the elevator in his taxi uniform. Need a ride, boss? Not today, Jack. But there's a reporter job opening up at the Tribune. Story like this needs someone who knows how to tell it right. The elevator doors closed on Catherine's face as she was led out by security. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with messages from suppliers, competitors, and bankers who'd already caught wind of Patterson Construction's impending doom. Time to start rebuilding. After all, that's what Blackwoods do best. By sunset, Patterson Construction stock had dropped 60%. I watched the numbers scroll across my office screen while Thomas reviewed the revised Milwaukee project specs. Amazing how many problems disappear when you don't have to cut corners to match a fraudulent bid. City planning approved our new environmental impact statement, Thomas said, not looking up from his tablet. And 3 of Patterson's former board members called. They're willing to testify about Morrison's pattern of regulatory violations. Send their information to the FBI. I turned away from the windows. How's Neil doing with the system audit? Found and closed every back door Catherine's IT consultants installed. He's also tracking some interesting money movements. Seems Morrison's been hiding assets in his ex-wife's name. FBI's particularly interested in that angle. My private line rang, the one whose number only 5 people had. Victor Blackwood. You ruthless old bastard. My younger brother Michael's voice, first time in 12 years. Just saw the news about Patterson Construction. That Morrison kid really thought he could outmaneuver you. Hello, Michael. Still running that architectural firm in Boston? You know I am. Look, about that fight over Dad's construction company. Ancient history. I watched a crane swing between buildings, carrying steel beams to their precise positions. How's your boy doing? The one who wanted to learn structural engineering. A pause. Joey? He graduates MIT next spring. Top of his class. Send me his transcript. Blackwood Tower's adding an engineering division. Might need some fresh eyes on these new projects. Another pause, longer this time. You're something else. Vic. Catherine shows up with evidence of Dad's company cooking the books. You spend 12 years letting me think I was right to walk away, then you spring the trap on her and offer my kid a job in the same week? The evidence Catherine showed you was forged. Dad ran a clean business. That's why I fought so hard to keep his name on it. Took me a while to trace those documents, but when I did, I let him fill in the blanks. Anyway, Joey's job offer stands. Family business could use more family. After Michael hung up, Thomas cleared his throat. You knew? All these years. Catherine tried the same play twice. Thought she could split up another set of brothers over a family business. Only this time I saw it coming. I picked up my coat. Come on. Your Uncle Michael's flying in tomorrow. Tonight, we're having dinner with your Aunt Sarah. Time she knew her brother-in-law didn't die with dirty hands. The elevator ride down was quiet until Thomas spoke. You know what I realized today? When everything went down in the boardroom, you never raised your voice. Never lost control. Your grandfather taught me that. Said real power doesn't need to shout. The lobby was empty except for Jack Sullivan, reading tomorrow's early edition. The headline read, Patterson Construction under federal investigation. CEO and associates face criminal charges. Need that right now, boss? Jack folded his paper, showing the subheading. Tribune welcomes back veteran reporter Jack Sullivan with exclusive coverage. Got room for 2? My son's joining me for dinner. Outside, Chicago's evening traffic moved like a well-oiled machine. Buildings I'd raised over 4 decades caught the setting sun, glass and steel monuments to doing things right the first time. In the back of Jack's taxi, I watched my son checking his phone, probably already planning tomorrow's meetings. He had that same look his mother used to get when tackling a tough project. Determined, focused, unstoppable. The Milwaukee project timeline needs revision, Thomas said, looking up. With Patterson out, we can do it right. Might take longer, cost more, but it'll stand for 50 years, I finished. That's what legacy means, son. Building something that lasts. Jack took the long way to the restaurant, past the site of my first major project, a downtown renovation that launched Blackwood Construction into the big leagues. The old building still stood proud, not a crack in sight. Just like Dad taught me. Check every worker, trust your family, and build things to last. Catherine and Morrison never understood that. They thought legacy was something you could steal. But real legacy? That's something you build, brick by brick, day by day, with people you trust at your side. 1 year later, I stood at the same window in my office, watching the Milwaukee waterfront project rise ahead of schedule. The morning sun caught the steel framework, making it gleam like victory. My brother Michael's architectural firm had redesigned the entire project, saved us $30 million in materials while making it twice as impressive. His son Joey had spotted that opportunity, earned himself a fast track to senior engineering status. The Tribune's business section lay open on my desk. Patterson Construction assets liquidated in federal settlement. Below that, a smaller headline. Former CEO Morrison pleads guilty to federal charges. Jack Sullivan's byline on both stories. He'd won a local journalism award for exposing the construction industry corruption. Not bad for a guy who'd spent 5 years driving a taxi. My intercom buzzed. Mr. Blackwood, your son is here with the Asian development contracts. Thomas walked in carrying 2 folders and a familiar steel thermos. Brought you real coffee. That stuff Maria makes taste like surrender. He'd taken over operations 6 months ago, already landed 3 international deals. The construction crews respected him. He'd insisted on learning the business from the ground up, just like I had. How's the new environmental cleanup company performing? I asked, pouring coffee that smelled like ambition. 30% over projected profits. Turns out there's good money in doing things legally. He smirked. By the way, Catherine's divorce from Morrison just finalized. She tried to claim half his hidden assets. I raised an eyebrow. How'd that work out? FBI seized everything before she could touch it. She's working reception at a dental office in Milwaukee. Funny thing, it's right across from our waterfront project. Gets to watch us build it right every single day. Neilchin poked his head in. He'd finally started wearing suits, though he still kept a hoodie in his office. Sorry to interrupt, but you'll want to see this. First National Bank just failed their federal audit. They're being absorbed by competitors. Boards being replaced. I nodded, remembering Catherine's smug face when she tried to use their backing for the takeover. Make sure our friends at the Banking Commission get first crack at any construction-related documents. The phone rang, Michael calling about dinner. 4th Sunday in a row our families would eat together. Sarah would bring photos of her brother-in-law, my first wife's brother, and we'd remember the good days, before Catherine tried to poison those memories with her lies. Looking out at my city, at the buildings bearing my father's name and my son's future, I thought about power. Real power isn't in steel and glass. It's not in bank accounts or corner offices. Real power is in building something so solid that cheap shots and shortcuts can't touch it. Something that stands long after the pretenders have fallen. Thomas joined me at the window. You know what Morrison said when they let him out of the courthouse? I just wanted to build something big. And that's why he failed, I replied, watching another crane lift steel into the morning sky. You don't build big. You build right. Everything else follows. Below us, Chicago was waking up. My buildings caught the sun, casting shadows over smaller structures that hadn't been built to last. Somewhere in Milwaukee, Catherine was starting another day answering phones, watching our newest tower rise, understanding finally what real legacy means. And me? I had work to do. Because empires aren't built by knocking things down. They're built by raising them up, straight and strong, with a foundation that nothing can crack.